Financial influencers, ranging from How Many Works to Graham Stephan, are at war. What ignited the conflict? Well, a simple cup of coffee. Why is coffee such a contentious issue? What's really at stake that's being fought over? And can we resolve the conflict? I've got answers, so let's go. The division amongst financial influencers isn't whether they like coffee or consume it themselves. Really, coffee is just the scapegoat. Coffee is an easy example of a small purchase that a lot of people make without ever really thinking about it, but despite being small, might be holding you back from reaching financial freedom. I'm guilty of this myself. One of my earliest videos on this channel showed that given how much the average American spends on coffee and how little the average American saves, cutting out coffee for 40 years could be the equivalent of 24 years of savings. So, at the heart of the issue, the influencer divide isn't about coffee. It's about expenses like coffee and whether they matter or not. Maybe a better way of framing the issue is whether you should focus on little expenses or big expenses. And before I try to answer that question, let's go over what the two sides of the influencer debate actually agree on. Every financial influencer, unless they're totally out of their mind, agrees that Americans suck at saving. 64% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. The average American under the age of 35 has just $13,000 saved for retirement. And young people are already feeling insecure about their retirement. Now, some people will say, it's not that Americans suck at saving, it's just that wages aren't high enough. But this argument just doesn't work for a couple of reasons. For one, America is still one of the wealthiest countries in the world, and maybe the easiest country to become wealthy in. So I've never understood this argument. And second, 35% of Americans earning $200,000 a year or more still report living paycheck to paycheck. So even if everybody earned an insane income, it clearly isn't a complete solution. That's because no matter how much money you make, it's always possible to spend more. So while many financial influencers like Graham Stephan, Iman Gadzhi, and Joshua Mayo have made fortunes by telling other people how to get rich, it clearly isn't enough on its own. And not only is saving money a critical part of reaching financial freedom, I've even shown that reducing your expenses is 26 times more powerful than earning more. That's because the amount of money that you need to retire depends on the amount of money that you spend. So anybody with two brain cells knows that saving money is important, and to reach financial freedom, everybody agrees that you have to save a lot. But what not everybody agrees on is how you should save. And that's what brings us to the great influencer divide. On one side of the debate, you have the influencers that focus on little expenses, like coffee. And there's a few reasons they do this. Perhaps the most cynical explanation for this is that this type of financial advice has the broadest possible market. Almost everyone has a few little expenses, and given that a shockingly large number of Americans spend more on coffee than investing in their own savings, coffee is an easy target. But even if you don't buy a morning coffee, you still probably have a few small and seemingly insignificant expenses that you make routinely. So when financial influencers talk about cutting coffee, their advice probably applies to almost anybody listening. And even better, expenses like coffee are some of the easiest purchases to cut out of your budget. I mean, nobody really needs coffee. Everybody just likes coffee. Even if you know that you're spending hundreds of dollars more than you should on rent every month, moving is a big barrier to reducing this expense. But almost everybody could cut out an expense like coffee. And while the cynical interpretation of this is that financial influencers are just telling people what they want to hear, having a small and doable objective, like cutting out a morning coffee, might be exactly what somebody needs to start building frugal habits. And cutting out a purchase like coffee isn't just to get somebody started. These financial decisions could have a massive difference on your financial health. One $5 coffee might not be a lot, but this same purchase every morning really could add up. Between coffee, multiple streaming services, overpriced groceries, and frequent clothes shopping, it's easy to spend over $20 a day. and that's $7,300 per year. $7,300 is already a lot of money, but if invested, that money could grow to even more. Had you saved that $20 a day and earned a 7% return on your money over the course of 50 years, that money would have grown to about $3 million. That's absolutely crazy. But not only would these savings have increased your wealth, they also would have dramatically reduced how much money you need to save for retirement. The rule of thumb is that you should save at least 25 times your annual expenses before considering yourself financially independent. That means to support a $20 a day purchase, you would want at least $182,500 extra dollars. That's literally years of earnings. To reach financial freedom before 30 years old, I've done everything I can to reduce my expenses. Even those small purchases can make a big difference. But not every influencer agrees that these little expenses should be the priority. So why do these famous influencers think that coffee doesn't really matter after all? Well, they argue that, intuitively, larger expenses will make a larger difference on your financial health. These larger expenses should be the priority. And that definitely makes sense. When I was moving to Virginia to start my first career job, my number one priority was finding a low-cost apartment. This was my priority because housing is my largest expense by far. In a previous video, I showed that housing accounts for about 2/3 of my annual expenses. Given how expensive housing is in my area, it could be a lot worse. Average rent is around $2,000 a month in my area, which is way more than I wanted to pay. Luckily, I was able to find an apartment for half that price. When you compare the cost of coffee to the $1,000 a month that I'm saving, those little expenses start to look kind of insignificant. So not only will these little expenses be potentially dwarfed by larger financial decisions, some financial influencers argue that by focusing on these little expenses at all, you could slow down your journey to financial freedom. Now, there's a few reasons for this. For one, you don't want to pat yourself on the back for cutting an insignificant expense when you're still bleeding money elsewhere. That's what we call Pennywise but pound foolish, and it's a big problem. Another issue is what the YouTube channel How Money Works calls willpower fatigue. The idea is that people only have a limited amount of energy to devote to saving money. If you cut out all of the little things that you enjoy in life, you could make yourself a lot less happy without making a meaningful difference on your financial health. So both sides of the debate have some good points, but each is missing something. Good thing I'm here to resolve the conflict. The influencers that encourage their followers to cut out little expenses are right that these little expenses really could add up, and making these changes could be a great first step. Doing that won't have a dramatic difference on your lifestyle, but it will make an immediate difference on your financial health. But what these influencers sometimes miss is that cutting these little expenses won't solve everything. These little expenses are part of a bigger picture. For me, my biggest role model in the financial freedom community was Mr. Money Mustache. He talked about saving on little expenses, like driving less and cutting his own hair. But what really enabled him to retire at 31 years old wasn't just these little expenses. These little expenses were part of a bigger picture. Mr. Money Mustache kept his whole family's expenses under $25,000 a year. Just cutting out coffee isn't going to make that radical of a difference. And it's true that big expenses will have an outsized difference on your wealth. What house and what car you buy could be the difference between years of work. But the biggest issue with focusing exclusively on these big expenses is that they happen so rarely. I mean, these expenses only happen every couple of years. Take a look at this chart from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which shows where Americans spend their money every year. Housing might be the largest, but that doesn't mean that it's the easiest to cut. Food might be just 1/3 of that cost, but it's likely far more flexible. And entertainment is completely optional. I mean, this YouTube channel only costs a like. So, while it's true that my decision to live with roommates is a big part of my plan to reach financial freedom before 30, there are a lot of other ways to save. So, what's my solution to the great influencer divide? Well, it's extremely simple. Just cut out both the little and the big expenses. What I've never understood about this influencer debate is both sides act like you can only cut one expense at a time. You're a smart, capable person, and you can be responsible for managing your own finances and setting good financial goals. For me, I set the extreme goal of reaching financial freedom in my 20s. To do that, I had to make some serious lifestyle adjustments. But cutting expenses doesn't take any effort. It's easy. And as for willpower fatigue, this has never been an issue for me. Knowing that I'm getting closer to financial freedom has always given me more energy, not less. So make smart decisions on the big financial decisions you make. Find the little ways that you can save a few extra dollars. Build cheaper habits. Do it all. Your financial freedom is at stake. Set your financial goals and figure out what you have to do to get there. And if you want to achieve your financial goals right alongside me, all you have to do is smash that subscribe button. And before you go, there's something super important that I need to address. In this video, I focused almost exclusively on reducing expenses. And that's really important, but a lot of people feel that the biggest thing holding them back is having a low-paying job. That's why, last week, I made a video explaining how to get rich on a low income, where I shared 9 tips that I learned from somebody that did exactly that. So I hope you'll check that video out next, and I'll see you next time.